Get out of that seat. Now. I won't ask you a second time." The voice wasn't just rude, it was a weapon. On a freezing Christmas Eve at Teterboro Airport, inside the ultra-exclusive cabin of a Bombardier Global 7500, a pilot made the biggest mistake of his life. He looked at a quiet black woman in a hoodie, saw the color of her skin, and decided she didn't belong in first class. He thought he was clearing space for a VIP. He didn't realize he was shouting at the woman who signed his paychecks. He didn't know that the hoodie cost more than his car, or that the plane's tail number was her birth date. Karma isn't just a concept. Tonight, it's a billionaire cruising at 40,000 feet, and she's about to serve a dish colder than the blizzard outside. The snow at Teterboro Airport was coming down in sheets, thick, white curtains that turned the world into a blur of grey and static. It was the kind of Christmas Eve weather that grounded commercial flights at JFK and Newark, leaving thousands stranded on plastic chairs, eating stale pretzels. But Teterboro was different. Teterboro was where the 0.001% flew. Here, the snow didn't stop the movement of money. It simply added a dramatic backdrop to it. On the tarmac, the sleek, metallic body of a Bombardier Global 7500 sat like a predator waiting to pounce. It was a masterpiece of aviation engineering, capable of flying from New York to Hong Kong without stopping for fuel. Its tail number, N12224VS, was stenciled in a subtle matte gold against the midnight blue fuselage. Inside the cabin, the air was warm and smelled faintly of bergamot and expensive leather. In Seat 1A, the prime spot, the throne of the aircraft, sat Vivienne Solis. To the untrained eye, Vivienne looked like a nobody. She was 42 years old, with skin the color of deep espresso and hair braided back in neat, practical cornrows. She wore an oversized heather-gray cashmere hoodie and black leggings. There were no diamonds on her fingers, no flashy watch on her wrist. She was curled up with a worn paperback book, her noise-cancelling headphones resting around her neck. She looked exhausted, the bone-deep tiredness that comes from closing a $3 billion merger in Tokyo and flying straight to New York for a board meeting, only to try and make it to Aspen for Christmas morning. She wasn't just a passenger. Vivienne Solis was the CEO and founder of Solis Vanguard, a global logistics and pharmaceutical conglomerate. She didn't just rent jets, she bought fleets. But tonight, she wasn't the CEO. She was just a woman who wanted to sleep. "Can I get you anything else, ma'am, before the others board?" Vivienne looked up. The flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah with a nervous smile, was hovering with a crystal pitcher of water. Sarah was new. She had been a reserve attendant called in last minute because the usual chief stewardess had the flu. Sarah didn't know who Vivienne was. The manifest just listed her as V. Solis, guest. "No, thank you, Sarah," Vivienne said, her voice low and raspy. "Just peace and quiet. It's been a long week." "Of course," Sarah whispered, backing away. "We're just waiting on the primary charter party. 2 passengers. Then Captain Hammerstein says we can try to beat the de-icing queue." Vivienne nodded and closed her eyes. Technically, this wasn't her personal private jet. Her personal jet, a Gulfstream G700, was in maintenance in London. This plane, the Global 7500, belonged to her company's charter division, Vanguard Aviation. She had pulled strings to hop on this empty leg flight that was scheduled to pick up a charter client in New York and take them to Aspen. Since the plane was going there anyway, she blocked off a seat for herself. She was the owner, riding shotgun on her own asset. The peace lasted exactly 4 minutes. A gust of freezing air swept through the cabin as the main door opened. The sound of heavy boots stomping off snow echoed in the entryway. Then came the voice. It was booming, authoritative, and laced with the kind of arrogance that only comes from a man who is used to being obeyed without question. "Sarah, why is the cabin temperature set to 70? It feels like a sauna in here. Drop it to 68 and get the champagne on ice. The clients are pulling up to the FBO now." Captain Brock Hammerstein stepped into the main cabin. He was a large man, 6'3", with silver hair gelled perfectly into place and a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite. He wore his uniform like a costume of war. 4 stripes on his shoulders, pristine white shirt, tie knotted tight. Brock was a veteran pilot, the kind who bragged about his flying hours and flirted with the younger flight attendants. He was the chief pilot for this specific aircraft, and he treated the plane like his personal kingdom. He stopped dead when he saw Vivian in seat 1A. He blinked, his blue eyes narrowing. He looked at the iPad in his hand, then back at the woman in the hoodie. He didn't see a billionaire. He saw a black woman in casual clothes, curled up in the most expensive seat on the plane, looking like she was ready for a nap on a Greyhound bus. "Excuse me," Brock said. He didn't say it politely. It was a challenge. Vivian opened one eye. "Yes?" "I think you're in the wrong seat," Brock said, stepping closer. He loomed over her, invading her personal space. "The crew rest seats are in the back, past the galley, or if you're a friend of the crew, the jump seat is in the cockpit." Vivian sat up slowly. She placed her book down. "I'm not crew, Captain. I'm a passenger on the manifest." Brock scoffed. A short, sharp sound. "Manifest? I saw the manifest. It lists a solace. I assumed that was an employee or a nanny for the St. James family." "I am not a nanny," Vivian said, her voice remaining impossibly calm despite the sudden spike in her heart rate. "I am V. Solace, and I was cleared for this flight by dispatch 3 hours ago." Brock looked her up and down, his lip curling in distaste. "Look, miss, I don't know what wires got crossed at dispatch, but the St. James family, Mr. Preston St. James and his fiancée Tiffany, are paying full charter price for this bird. That's $50,000 for the hop to Aspen. They expect exclusivity." "I'm aware of who is boarding," Vivian said. "There are 14 seats on this Global 7500. Surely there is room for 3 people." "It's not about room," Brock snapped, his face reddening. "It's about standards. Seat 1A is the principal seat. It's for the primary client, not for deadheaders." He used the term deadheader, an airline employee flying for free, with a sneer, but the implication was clear. He didn't think she could afford the air inside the cabin, let alone the seat. "I'm comfortable here," Vivian said, leaning back. "And since I boarded first, I'll remain here." Brock opened his mouth to shout, but the sound of high heels clacking on the air stairs stopped him. "Brocky, darling, tell me you have the heater on. My toes are positively frozen." The clients had arrived, and the storm inside the plane was about to get much worse than the one outside. Tiffany Vanderwall, soon to be St. James, entered the cabin like she was making a debutante entrance, despite the fact that the only audience was a pilot and a flight attendant. She was draped in a white fur coat that looked like it had cost the lives of several Arctic foxes. Underneath, she wore a red velvet tracksuit that was tight enough to cut off circulation. She was beautiful in a manufactured way. Fillers, extensions, and a diamond ring on her finger the size of a golf ball. Trailing behind her was Preston St. James. He was an investment banker from Connecticut, quiet, balding, and looking perpetually tired of Tiffany's energy. He carried a leather briefcase and looked like he just wanted a scotch. "Welcome aboard, Miss Vanderwall, Mr. St. James," Brock said, his voice instantly transforming from aggressive to syrupy sweet. He bowed his head slightly. "We're ready to go as soon as we get the de-icing truck. Sarah has the Dom Perignon 2012 chilled." Finally, Tiffany sighed, shaking the snow off her fur. She looked around the cabin, her eyes scanning the beige leather and mahogany wood. It's smaller than the Gulf Stream, Preston. I told you we should have waited for the G650. This is a Global 7500, babe. It's actually bigger, Preston mumbled, checking his phone. Tiffany ignored him. She started walking down the aisle, her eyes locked on seat 1A, the captain's seat, the seat where Vivian was sitting. Tiffany stopped. She tilted her head, confused. She looked at Vivian, then at Brock, then back at Vivian. Tiffany said, pointing a manicured finger. Who is this? Vivian didn't move. She held Tiffany's gaze. Good evening. I'm a fellow passenger. Tiffany laughed. It was a high, brittle sound. A fellow passenger? Preston, did we book a shared charter? I thought this was a private flight. Why is there a person in my seat? Brock stepped forward, puffing out his chest. He was eager to play the hero for the wealthy client. My apologies, Miss Vanderwall. There seems to have been a mix-up with the dispatch office. This is an employee of the aviation company who needed a lift. I am not an employee, Vivian corrected, her voice sharpening. I am a client. She's in my seat, Tiffany whined, turning to Preston. I always sit in 1A. It has the best view and the leg rest extends further. Preston, tell her to move. Preston looked uncomfortable. He glanced at Vivian. He saw a woman who looked respectable, if underdressed. Tiff, there are plenty of seats. Just take 1B, or the divan in the back is nice. I don't want the divan. Tiffany stomped her foot. It's Christmas Eve, Preston. We paid 50 grand. I want to sit where I want to sit. And I don't want to look across the aisle at someone wearing a gym hoodie. She wrinkled her nose, as if Vivienne smelled like trash. It ruins the aesthetic. Vivienne felt a cold rage tightening in her stomach. It wasn't the first time she'd dealt with women like Tiffany. Vivian had grown up in the 9th Ward of New Orleans. She had fought her way through scholarships, Ivy League boardrooms, and hostile takeovers. She had been underestimated by men 10 times more powerful than Preston and Tiffany. But tonight, she was tired. And tonight, she owned the plane. The aesthetic? Vivian repeated. Madam, this is a mode of transport, not a photo shoot. Tiffany's jaw dropped. Excuse me? Do you know who my fiancé is? He's a partner at Goldman. Vivian almost laughed. A partner. Vivian had Goldman Sachs on speed dial. Her company paid Goldman Sachs $20 million a year in consulting fees. Captain, Tiffany snapped, turning to Brock. Get her out of my seat. Actually, get her off the plane. I don't feel safe. She looks suspicious. How do we know she's not a squatter or a terrorist? The accusation hung in the air, heavy and ugly. Sarah, the flight attendant, stepped forward, her hands trembling. Ms. Vanderwall, please. Ms. Solis is on the manifest. We can't just— Quiet, Sarah, Brock barked. He turned his full attention back to Vivian. The veneer of professionalism was gone. Now, he was just a bully with a badge. You heard the client, Brock said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. You are disrupting the flight. You are upsetting the paying passengers. I have the authority to remove anyone who poses a threat to the safety or comfort of the flight. I am a threat to neither, Vivian said. I am reading a book. You are trespassing in a premium seat, Brock lied. Now I'm going to give you 2 choices. Choice A, you get up, grab your little backpack, and you go sit in the flight attendant jump seat in the galley. It's a fold-down chair next to the toilet. You stay there, you don't speak, and you don't look at the clients. He leaned in closer, his breath smelling of coffee and mints. Or choice B, I call the Port Authority police. I tell them you're belligerent. They drag you off this plane in handcuffs. You spend Christmas Eve in a holding cell in New Jersey, and you end up on the no-fly list. What's it going to be?" Vivian looked at Brock. She memorized his face. She memorized the name tag. B. Hammerstein. She looked at Tiffany, who was smirking, checking her makeup in her compact mirror, confident that the help was being taken out. Vivian had a decision to make. She could pull out her phone, call the CEO of the charter management company, who worked for her, and have Brock fired on the spot. They would never leave the tarmac. But then, she wouldn't get to Aspen. And neither would they. And more importantly, she wouldn't see just how far they were willing to go. She wanted to see the depth of their rot. She wanted to give them enough rope to hang themselves properly. She closed her book. "I'll take the jump seat," Vivian said softly. The humiliation was designed to be public. Brock stood in the aisle, arms crossed, watching like a prison warden as Vivian unbuckled her seatbelt. She gathered her book, her headphones, and her small leather tote bag. "Make sure you wipe the seat down, Sarah," Tiffany said loudly as Vivian stood up. "I don't want any germs." Vivian paused. She looked at Tiffany. For a second, the air in the cabin crackled. Vivian's eyes, usually warm, were now cold, hard obsidian. Tiffany faltered for a second, her smile twitching, sensing a power she couldn't identify. But then, Vivian looked away, breaking the connection. "Right this way, Mom," Sarah whispered, her eyes full of apology. "I'm so sorry." Vivian walked past Tiffany, who dramatically pulled her fur coat closer to her body to avoid touching Vivian's leggings. She walked past Preston, who had the decency to look down at his shoes, ashamed but too cowardly to speak up against his fiancée. She walked past Brock, who smirked. "That's better. Know your place." They led her to the galley area at the front of the plane, near the entryway. The Bombardier Global 7500 is a massive jet, but the galley is still a workspace. There was a small, fold-down seat, the jump seat, that was used by crew members during takeoff and landing if the cockpit was full. It was stiff, upright, and uncomfortable. It was situated directly across from the lavatory door and next to the coffee maker. I can get you a blanket from the crew stash," Sarah offered, her voice shaking. "And maybe a glass of wine? I have a bottle of Merlot that isn't for the guests." "Water is fine, Sarah," Vivian said, sitting down on the hard jump seat. She strapped herself in. The view was terrible. She was looking at a wall of circuit breakers and the coffee machine. Through the gap in the curtain, she could see Tiffany settling into seat 1A, her seat. "Oh, this is much better," Tiffany's voice carried clearly from the main cabin. "Brocky, honey, pop that champagne. Let's get this party started before we even take off." "Coming right up, Miss Vanderwall," Brock called out, his voice jovial again. Vivian sat in the shadows of the galley. The humiliation burned, a hot coal in her chest. She was the owner of the holding company that owned this plane. She was worth $4.2 billion. She had donated wings to hospitals, and she was being treated like a stowaway next to a toilet because a pilot decided she looked wrong. She reached into a tote bag and pulled out her phone. She had no intention of calling the police. That was too small. She unlocked her phone and opened a secure app, Vanguard Ops, Executive Access. She typed in her biometric passkey. The screen loaded a live map of the world, showing every asset owned by her company. She zoomed in on Teterboro Airport. She found the pulsing blue dot, N12224, Yes. She clicked on the aircraft icon. A menu popped up with details: fuel load, crew manifest, passenger manifest, maintenance logs. She clicked on crew manifest. Captain Brock Hammerstein. First officer David Chen. Flight attendant Sarah Miller. She clicked on employment status for Brock Hammerstein. It showed his 10-year history, his salary, which was substantial, and his notes. Vivian's thumb hovered over the screen. She could ground the plane right now. A single red flag command from her account would shut down the plane's avionics via the satellite link. It was an anti-theft measure. But the plane began to move. The engines whined as they spooled up. They were taxiing. If she stopped them now, she'd be stuck in New Jersey in a snowstorm. No, she thought. Let them fly. Let them drink my champagne. Let them think they've won. She navigated to the in-flight connectivity tab. She had admin access to the plane's Wi-Fi. She saw 2 devices connect immediately. Tiffany's iPhone 14 Pro Max, Preston's iPad. She smiled, a small, dangerous curve of her lips. She wasn't going to disconnect them. She was going to let them dig their graves deeper. From the cabin, she heard the pop of a cork. "To Aspen," Tiffany squealed. "To standards," Brock replied, his voice booming. Vivian tightened her seatbelt. The plane lurched forward, gathering speed for takeoff. The G-force pressed her into the hard, uncomfortable jump seat. She closed her eyes and began to compose an email. It wasn't to customer service. It was to the Board of Directors of Vanguard Aviation. Subject: immediate restructuring of flight operations. The flight to Aspen was 4 hours. A lot can happen in 4 hours. At 41,000 feet, the world usually looks peaceful. Above the cloud layer, the storm that had battered New Jersey was just a memory, a dark, bruised carpet stretching out below them. But inside the cabin of N-44 VS, the atmosphere was toxic. Vivian sat rigid in the jump seat. The cushion was thin, designed for short durations, not a 4-hour haul across the country. Every vibration of the aircraft hummed against her spine. Across from her, the curtain separating the galley from the main cabin was partially open, giving her a front-row seat to the luxury she was funding, but denied from enjoying. She watched Sarah, the flight attendant, rush back and forth like a nervous hummingbird. Sarah was trying her best, but Tiffany Vanderwall was an impossible passenger. "Sarah, the ice in this is melting," Tiffany's voice whined, carrying easily over the drone of the engines. "I asked for chipped ice, not cubes. Cubes dilute the vintage." "I'm sorry, Ms. Vanderwall. We don't have an ice chipper on board," Sarah explained gently. "Well, use a fork or something. God, do I have to think of everything?" Tiffany huffed. Vivian closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She was hungry. She had skipped lunch to make the flight. The smell of the catering, filet mignon with truffle butter and roasted asparagus, wafted into the galley. It was her favorite in-flight meal. She had personally approved the menu for Vanguard Aviation 3 months ago. Sarah came back into the galley, looking defeated. She saw Vivian sitting in the dark corner. "Ms. Solis," Sarah whispered, opening the oven. "I have an extra filet. The pilots ate earlier, and Mr. St. James isn't eating his. I can plate it for you?" Vivian's stomach growled, betraying her. "That would be kind, Sarah." "Thank you." Sarah nodded and began to arrange the beef on a porcelain plate. She was just drizzling the sauce when the cockpit door opened. Captain Brock Hammerstein stepped out. He had put the plane on autopilot and left the first officer, David, to monitor the instruments so he could schmooze with the clients. He saw Sarah plating the food. He saw Vivian unbuckling her seatbelt to accept the tray. "What do you think you're doing?" Brock asked, his voice low and sharp. Sarah froze. "Captain, there's an extra meal. Miss Solis hasn't eaten." Brock stepped into the small galley, effectively blocking Vivienne's exit. He looked at the filet mignon, then at Vivienne. He snatched the plate from Sarah's hands. "This is premium catering," Brock said, staring down at Vivienne. "Cost per plate is $150. This is for charter clients, not for stowaways in the jump seat, I am paying for this flight, Vivian said, her voice steady. Indirectly or otherwise. You're a deadheader, Brock corrected. You get crew rations. There's a box of granola bars in the lower cabinet. And water. That's it. He turned to Sarah. Get rid of this, or eat it yourself, but don't give it to her. If we start feeding the free riders steak, they'll expect it every time. It sets a bad precedent. Sarah looked like she was about to cry. Captain, please, do it, Sarah, Brock snapped. Then he put on his charming smile and walked through the curtain into the main cabin. Ms. Vanderwall, how is the champagne? I came to check personally. Vivian watched him go. She looked at Sarah, who was trembling, holding the plate of steaming food. Eat it, Sarah, Vivian said softly. You've been working hard. I'll be fine. I can sneak you a roll, Sarah whispered, tears in her eyes. Or some cheese? I'll take a granola bar, Vivian said, reaching for the cheap cardboard box on the floor. She unwrapped a dry oat bar. It tasted like sawdust. She chewed it slowly, listening to Brock recount war stories to Tiffany in the other room. Yeah, I used to fly F-18s, Brock lied. Vivian knew for a fact his military record showed he flew cargo transport planes, C-130s. Still respectable, but he was embellishing for effect. You need a steady hand to handle a bird like this. Not just anyone can tame a Global 7500. You're so brave, Tiffany cooed. Preston is afraid of turbulence, aren't you, honey? I'm not afraid. I just get motion sickness, Preston muttered. Speaking of which, Tiffany called out. I need to use the powder room. Captain, make sure the help isn't in there. Vivian stiffened. She actually did need to use the restroom. The Global 7500 had a beautiful lavatory in the rear, but there was also a smaller crew lavatory in the front, right next to where she was sitting. Brock poked his head back into the galley. Hey, you, jump seat. Vivian looked up. Ms. Vanderwall needs the rear lav. You stay put. If you need to go, you wait until she's back in her seat. I don't want you walking through the cabin disturbing them. I can use the forward lavatory, Vivian pointed out. It is right here. No, Brock said, blocking the door. That's for the pilots. I don't want passengers cluttering up my flight deck bathroom. You hold it. He slammed the cockpit door shut again. Vivian sat alone in the dim light of the galley. The humiliation was physical now. She was hungry, uncomfortable, and being denied basic biological needs. She took a sip of lukewarm water from a plastic bottle. Through the curtain, she heard Preston's voice change tone. He sounded stressed. Tiffany, can you turn the music down? I need to focus. This deal is going sideways. Oh, stop it, Tiffany dismissed him. It's Christmas Eve. Put the laptop away. I can't, Preston snapped. The Tokyo partners are balking at the valuation. If I don't have the revised prospectus ready by the time we land in Aspen, the merger with Kyoto Pharma is dead. My partners will skin me alive. Vivian's ears pricked up. Kyoto Pharma. She knew that name. Solace Vanguard had looked into acquiring Kyoto Pharma 6 months ago. They had passed on the deal because the due diligence showed massive hidden debt in their R&D division. It was a poison pill. If Preston's firm was trying to merge with them, they were walking into a trap. What's the big deal? Tiffany asked, pouring more champagne. Just tell them it's worth whatever you say it is. It doesn't work like that, Tiff. Preston sighed. We need a logistics partner to justify the supply chain valuation. We're banking on a contract with Solace Vanguard. If we can get Solace on board, the Japanese will sign. Vivian almost choked on her granola bar. They were banking on her. They were betting their entire merger on a contract with her company, a contract that she had never seen and certainly never signed. Preston was likely puffing up the potential partnership, to inflate the deal's value. Solace Vanguard? Tiffany laughed. That sounds like a video game. Who cares? The woman who runs it is a shark, Preston said, his voice full of fearful respect. Vivian Solace. They say she can smell blood in the water from a continent away. She's elusive. Nobody's seen her in public in 2 years. If she finds out we're leveraging her name without a signed LOI, she could sue us into oblivion. Well, she's not here, Tiffany said, clinking her glass against the window. So who cares? Relax, baby. You're rich, I'm pretty, and we're flying private. Life is good. Vivian sat in the darkness, a small, terrifying smile playing on her lips. Life is good, she thought. Enjoy it for the next hour, Tiffany, because the shark is in the galley. The first sign that things were about to change didn't come from the captain. It came from the coffee pot. Vivienne was watching the surface of the liquid in the glass carafe. It began to tilt, first to the left, then sharply to the right. The hum of the engines changed pitch, a deep, guttural growl replacing the steady whine. They were over the Midwest now, crossing a frontal boundary where cold Canadian air was colliding with warm moisture from the Gulf. It was a recipe for clear air turbulence. Cat. Invisible, sudden, and violent. Ladies and gentlemen, Brock's voice came over the intercom, sounding slightly annoyed rather than concerned. We've got a little chop ahead. I'm going to put the seatbelt sign on. Ms. Vanderwall, you might want to sit down. Ugh, buzzkill, Tiffany groaned. Vivian heard the rustle of fabric as Tiffany flopped back into seat 1A. Then the floor dropped out. It wasn't a bump, it was a free fall. The Global 7500, a massive 50-ton machine, dropped 400 feet in 2 seconds. In the galley, everything that wasn't strapped down went airborne. The box of granola bars hit the ceiling. Sarah, who had been in the aisle, screamed and grabbed a seat back to stop from being thrown. From the main cabin, the sound of breaking glass shattered the air. The bottle of Dom Perignon had flown off the table and smashed against the bulkhead. "My dress!" Tiffany shrieked. "It's all over my fur!" The plane slammed upward, hitting the bottom of the air pocket like it had hit concrete. The G-force pinned Vivian into the jump seat. Her head snapped back against the rest. "Preston, do something!" Tiffany screamed. "I can't control the weather, Tiffany," Preston yelled back, his voice high with panic. The turbulence didn't stop. It wasn't just bumps. The plane was yawing violently, the tail swinging side to side. This was severe turbulence, the kind that tests the structural limits of the airframe. Vivian looked at the flight attendant panel in the galley. The sterile cockpit light was flashing. Suddenly, the cockpit door burst open. Brock didn't come out. Instead, he shouted back at David, the first officer, "I can't get the autopilot to disengage. The servo is fighting me. Reset the FCC." He slammed the door, but not before Vivian saw the fear in his eyes. Brock Hammerstein, the arrogant sky god, was wrestling with a machine he didn't fully respect. The Wi-Fi in the cabin flickered. The satellite connection was unstable due to the rapid changes in attitude. In the main cabin, Preston St. James was hyperventilating. He was gripping his laptop like a life raft. The screen was glowing in the dim cabin. He was frantically trying to save his documents, terrified that the plane was going down and his legacy would be a failed merger. "I need a connection," Preston shouted. "I need to upload the file. If we crash, I need this sent." It was an irrational thought. If they crashed, the deal didn't matter. But panic makes people focus on strange things. He was trying to verify the corporate officer data for Solace Vanguard to finalize his bluff in the document. The plane gave another violent lurch, banking hard to the left. Preston's laptop slid off his tray table and skittered across the carpet, landing in the aisle right at the threshold of the galley. Preston unbuckled his seatbelt, a foolish move, and scrambled on his hands and knees to retrieve it. He crawled into the galley entryway. He grabbed the laptop. He looked up. Vivian was sitting there. She was calm. While Tiffany was screaming and Brock was shouting, Vivian sat with her hands folded in her lap, her eyes tracking the horizon line through the small galley window to anticipate the next dip. She wasn't afraid. She had flown through typhoons in the Pacific. Preston stared at her. The lighting in the galley was stark, the emergency floor track lighting casting an underglow on her face. He looked at his laptop screen. He had the Solace Vanguard corporate profile open. There was a photograph on the screen. It was a headshot from a Forbes article 3 years ago. The woman in the photo had her hair in a bun, wearing a sharp blazer. But the eyes, dark, intelligent, piercing, were identical. The cheekbones were identical. The set of the jaw was identical. Preston looked at the screen. Name: Vivian Solace. Position: founder and CEO. Net worth: $4.2 billion. He looked at the woman in the hoodie sitting on the jump seat next to the toilet. He looked back at the screen. He looked back at Vivian. The color drained from Preston's face so fast it looked like he had died. His mouth opened, working silently like a fish out of water. The turbulence shook the plane again, but Preston didn't seem to feel it. He was frozen by a much more terrifying realization. "You," Preston wheezed. "You're—" Vivian looked down at him, her expression unreadable. She didn't shout. She didn't gloat. She simply raised one eyebrow. "Mr. St. James," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a razor blade. "You should return to your seat. The merger with Kyoto Pharma has a hidden debt clause in subsection 4C. I wouldn't sign it if I were you, and you certainly won't be signing it with my company as a partner." Preston collapsed back onto his heels. The horror was total. He hadn't just been rude to a stranger. He had been complicit in humiliating the only person who could save his career, and worse, he was currently flying inside a metal tube that she owned. "Oh my God," Preston whispered. "Preston, get back here!" Tiffany screamed from the back. "I spilled champagne on my Prada." Preston turned his head slowly to look at his fiancée, the woman who had kicked the billionaire out of her seat, the woman who had treated Vivian Solace like a stray dog. He looked back at Vivian. I didn't know," Preston stammered. "I swear, Ms. Solace, I didn't know." "Ignorance is not a defense, Mr. St. James," Vivian said coldly. "It is merely a liability. Now buckle up. Captain Hammerstein is about to drop us another 2,000 feet to find smooth air. He's heavy-handed on the yoke." As if on cue, the nose of the plane dipped aggressively. Preston scrambled back to his seat, terrified, clutching his laptop to his chest as if it were a bomb. He strapped himself in next to Tiffany. He was shaking violently. "What is wrong with you?" Tiffany snapped, dabbing at her velvet tracksuit with a napkin. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Preston stared straight ahead, his eyes wide and unblinking. "Worse," Preston whispered, his voice cracking. "I just saw the landlord." "What?" Tiffany asked, confused. "Shut up, Tiffany," Preston hissed, a newfound intensity in his voice. "Just, for the love of God, shut up." Up in the cockpit, the radio crackled. "N224 VS, this is Denver Center," the air traffic controller's voice came through. "We have a pilot report of smooth air at flight level 360. Descend and maintain 360. "Copy, Denver," Brock's voice came back, breathless. "Descending to 360. The plane began to level out. The shaking subsided into a gentle vibration. The crisis of the weather was passing, but for Preston St. James and Brock Hammerstein, the real storm was just beginning, because the woman in the jump seat had just unlocked her phone again. And this time, she was making a call. The descent into Aspen-Pitkin County Airport is notoriously difficult. It requires a steep approach through a narrow valley, surrounded by 14,000-foot peaks. It is a landing that demands respect, precision, and humility. Captain Brock Hammerstein had none of these things left. He was rattled. The turbulence had bruised his ego, and the silence from the passenger cabin was unnerving. Usually, he would make a joke over the PA system, something to lighten the mood. But he felt a heavy dread settling in his gut, though he couldn't explain why. "Gear down," Brock ordered, his voice tight. "Gear down, 3 green," David, the first officer, replied. David was quiet. He had seen how Brock treated the woman in the jump seat, and he had seen the name on the manifest. Unlike Brock, David read the industry newsletters. He had a sinking suspicion he knew exactly who was sitting by the toilet, but he was too terrified of Brock's temper to speak up. He just wanted this flight to end. In the back, the mood was funereal. Preston St. James sat like a stone statue, staring blankly at the back of the seat in front of him. He hadn't spoken a word since the turbulence ended. He was mentally calculating his net worth, his career trajectory, and the likelihood of him working at a Cinnabon by next week. Tiffany, oblivious as ever, was reapplying her lip gloss. "God, Preston, lighten up! We're landing! I can see the lights. I bet the driver is already there with the heated seats." In the galley, Vivian Solis tightened her seatbelt. She looked at Sarah, who was strapped into the other jump seat, looking pale and exhausted. "It's almost over, Sarah," Vivian said, her voice gentle but firm. "I hope so," Sarah whispered. "I just hope I don't get fired for giving you that granola bar. Brock, Captain Hammerstein, he writes terrible reports if you disobey him." Vivian reached across the narrow gap and patted Sarah's hand. "Sarah, I promise you, you are not the one who is going to be fired tonight." The tires of the Global 7500 screeched against the tarmac. It was a hard landing, a Navy carrier landing, as Brock liked to call it. But in reality, it was just clumsy. The plane bounced once, shimmied, and then slammed down, the reverse thrusters roaring to slow the heavy beast on the icy runway. They taxied toward the private aviation terminal, FBO. Usually the ramp is quiet at night, but tonight the tarmac was bathed in flashing red and blue lights. "What is that?" Brock muttered, squinting through the cockpit windshield. "Accident on the ramp?" As he turned the nose of the jet toward their parking spot, the scene became clear. It wasn't an accident. 3 black SUVs with the Vanguard Global Security logo were parked in a phalanx. Beside them were 2 Aspen police cruisers, and standing right in the center, waiting for the engines to cut, was a tall man in a heavy wool coat. Brock recognized him. It was Arthur Pendleton, the director of flight operations for Vanguard Aviation, the man who was technically Brock's boss's boss. He was based in Chicago. Why was he standing on a freezing runway in Aspen on Christmas Eve? "What the hell?" Brock whispered. "Why is Pendleton here?" "Maybe he's here for the VIPs," David suggested weakly. Brock parked the plane. He ran the shutdown checklist with trembling hands. Yeah, that must be it. The St. James family must be bigger fish than I thought. Pendleton probably came to personally greet them to secure the contract. Brock stood up, adjusted his tie, and put his cap on. He put on his captain smile. He was going to walk out there, shake Pendleton's hand, and introduce the clients. He opened the cockpit door. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Aspen," Brock announced, stepping into the cabin. "Please remain seated until we open the main door." He looked at Vivian in the jump seat. "You, stay put. Do not move until the clients are off the plane. I don't want them seeing you." Vivian didn't answer. She just unbuckled her belt. The main cabin door opened. The cold mountain air rushed in. Brock stepped out onto the stairs, a wide grin on his face. He waved at Arthur Pendleton. "Director Pendleton, what a surprise. Merry Christmas, sir. We had a bit of chop, but I brought her in smooth as silk." Arthur Pendleton didn't smile. He didn't wave. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his face like a thundercloud. Beside him, 2 police officers stepped forward. "Captain Brock Hammerstein?" one of the officers asked. "Yes?" Brock's smile faltered. "Please step down slowly. Keep your hands visible." "What? Is this a joke?" Brock laughed nervously. "I'm the pilot. Step down. Now," Pendleton barked. His voice was not the voice of a colleague. It was the voice of an executioner. Brock walked down the stairs, confused. As soon as his feet hit the tarmac, the officers moved in. They didn't handcuff him immediately, but they flanked him, blocking his path. "What is going on?" Brock demanded. "I have clients on board." "You have the owner on board, you moron!" Pendleton spat. Brock froze. "What?" At that moment, Tiffany and Preston emerged at the top of the stairs. Tiffany was waving. "Hello! Hello, Aspen!" She stopped when she saw the police. Then, behind them, a figure emerged from the shadows of the galley. Vivian Solis stepped past Preston, past Tiffany, and stood at the top of the stairs. She pulled her hood down. The wind caught her braids. She stood tall, looking down at the tarmac like a queen surveying a battlefield. Arthur Pendleton, the director of operations, immediately snapped to attention. He walked past Brock, ignoring him completely, and approached the bottom of the stairs. He extended a hand. "Ms. Solis," Pendleton said, his voice full of deference. "I received your message from the air. I mobilized the local team immediately. I apologize deeply for the delay in your arrival." Vivian walked down the stairs, ignoring the hand. She stood toe-to-toe with Brock Hammerstein. "You," Brock whispered. His eyes darted from her face to the tail number of the plane. Ento 2224 VS. VS Vivian Solis. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. He had ordered the owner of the jet to sit by the toilet. He had denied her food. He had threatened to arrest her. "I gave you a choice, Captain," Vivian said, her voice carrying over the wind. "I told you I was a passenger. You chose to treat me like cargo." I didn't know," Brock stammered, sweat freezing on his forehead. "If I had known..." "If you had known I was a billionaire, you would have treated me with respect?" Vivian asked softly. "That is exactly the problem, Mr. Hammerstein. Your character is not defined by how you treat the people who sign your checks. It is defined by how you treat the people who serve your coffee." She turned to the police officer. "Officer, this man threatened a passenger with false arrest and intimidation during a federal flight. I would like to file a formal complaint. Furthermore, he is trespassing." "Trespassing?" Brock squeaked. "This is my plane," Vivian said. "You were terminated exactly 45 minutes ago, over Kansas. You are no longer an employee of Vanguard Aviation. Therefore, you are unauthorized personnel on the tarmac." "Ms. Solis, please," Brock begged, reaching out. "It's Christmas. I have a mortgage." "And I have standards," Vivian said coldly. "Get him out of my sight." The police escorted a weeping Brock Hammerstein toward the terminal building. The drama was far from over. Tiffany Vanderwall was standing on the tarmac, shivering in her fur, her mouth agape. She looked at Preston. "Preston, why is the pilot getting arrested? And why is the help talking to the police?" Preston St. James looked at his fiancée. The spell was broken. The fear had clarified his vision. He looked at Tiffany, vain, cruel, and shallow. And then he looked at Vivian Solis, a woman of immense power who had endured their insults with a quiet dignity he couldn't comprehend. "She's not the help, Tiffany," Preston said, his voice dead. "She's Vivian Solace. She owns Solace Vanguard. She owns this plane. She owns the company I was trying to merge with." Tiffany's eyes went wide. She turned to Vivian, putting on her most dazzling fake smile. Oh my goodness," Tiffany squealed, stepping forward. "Ms. Solace, I had no idea. We were just joking around up there. You know how it is. Travel stress. I love your hoodie, by the way. Is that Balenciaga?" Vivian didn't even look at her. She spoke to the air. "Mr. St. James." Preston flinched. "Yes, Ms. Solace?" "I will be calling the board of Kyoto Pharma in the morning," Vivian said. "I will inform them that any partnership with your firm is a liability to their brand. I don't do business with people who lack basic empathy. If you can't manage your manners, you certainly can't manage a merger." Preston nodded slowly. He knew it was over. His career, the deal, the bonus, gone. "And as for you, Miss Vanderwall," Vivian finally turned to face Tiffany, "you are banned from Vanguard Aviation. Forever. You can find your own way home. I believe the Greyhound bus station is in Glenwood Springs. It's a 2-hour drive." "You can't do that," Tiffany shrieked. "We paid for a round trip." "Refunded," Vivian said. "My accounting team processed it while we were taxiing. Now get off my ramp." Security guards stepped forward to escort the couple away. Preston walked with his head down. Tiffany was screaming insults, her voice fading as they were led into the terminal to find a commercial taxi. Vivian stood alone in the cold for a moment, letting the silence wash over her. "Ms. Solace." A small voice came from the stairs. It was Sarah, the flight attendant. She was holding her small suitcase, looking terrified. I gathered my things," Sarah said. "I assume I'm fired too. Since I let him, since I didn't stop him?" Vivian turned. Her face softened. The mask of the Iron CEO dropped, revealing the tired woman underneath. "Sarah," Vivian said warmly, "come down here." Sarah walked down the stairs, shivering. Vivian took off her own cashmere scarf, a piece worth more than Sarah's monthly rent, and wrapped it around the young woman's neck. "You were the only person on that plane who showed me kindness when you thought I was nobody," Vivian said. "You risked your job to feed me. You tried to protect me." It wasn't right," Sarah said, tearing up. "No, it wasn't," Vivian agreed. "Brock is gone. I need a new chief of interior staff for my personal fleet. Not the charter fleet. My fleet. The Gulfstream G700 in London needs a head stewardess. The pay is triple what you're making now, and you never have to deal with people like Tiffany Vanderwall again." Sarah's jaw dropped. "Me? But I'm so new." "You have integrity," Vivian said. "I can train skills. I can't train a good heart. Do you want the job?" Yes, Mrs. Solace. "Thank you." "Good. Now get in the SUV. It's freezing out here, and I still haven't had that filet mignon." Vivian Solace turned and walked toward the lead SUV. The driver opened the door. She didn't look back at the plane. She didn't look back at the terminal where Brock was pleading his case to a police officer. She just got in the car. The engine purred. Karma had landed, and it had perfect timing. And that is the story of how a pilot lost his career, a banker lost his deal, and a billionaire taught everyone a lesson about judging a book by its cover. It's a brutal reminder. Be kind to everyone, because you never know who you're talking to. The person in the hoodie might just own the plane. What would you have done if you were Vivienne? Would you have revealed yourself earlier, or would you have waited until the end, like she did, to see their true colors? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of high-flying justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.